Welcome everyone to Cisco Connect. This is the Driving Innovation Through Technology session. My name is Carlos Pereira. I'm the Chief Architect for the Strategy, Emerging Technology and Incubation team. So once again, welcome everyone. So the motion of the session is to share with you how Cisco is driving innovation through the technologies, what the motions that we are doing, not only for internal innovation, but also for how you're doing incubation on new technologies and new frontiers that we're looking at the market. So before I go there, let me share what we've been doing as motions of accelerate innovations from Cisco as you go to the market. So if you look at Cisco, there are multiple aspects from which we drive innovations. The first one, we obviously built our own technology. We incubate inside this. We have multiple business units that are related to infrastructure and security and collaboration, and with, let's say, with WebEx, and we have other foundational product sets that help service providers and cloud providers. So we have over 25,000 engineers, and they have a headquarters in California, in San Jose, but we have engineering groups all over the world, and we have north of 23,000 patents and growing. And there is an internal ideation and incubation team in motion. That's exactly what I'm going to share on that session with you. From the investment arm, we have a corporate venture fund, which have invested in well over 100 companies, and we have acceleration of startups when you have multiple startups engaged in some of them on a total amount of investment and combined dollars, which is a considerable amount for the marketplace. So it's an area that we invest in early startups and incubation teams or technology that we see we can complement our portfolio or just augment and being partnerships or good areas where the market is headed towards. So another aspect for this is the acquisition piece. Cisco, since its inception, has been a company with a very strong appetite to acquire as we needed to complement or getting into new markets. And we have over 200 acquisitions. And we just, on this fiscal year that started at the beginning of the year, we closed a couple more. And there is no signs of deaccelerate that. In fact, we always look at the market and see if there are any relevant acquisitions that can help us on that aspect of getting to market and augment innovation. And as we get those acquisitions, we obviously get the patents and relevance that comes with their innovations as it applies. And most lately, we are investing also on acquiring companies focused on cloud native development. So we have even more talent that comes from the interaction with the open source community and more on the forward-looking cloud-native approach. And the last approach on that slide has to do with the partnerships and co-developments. So we do have a full group inside the emerging technologies and incubation that deals with research and universities, all the partnerships we have with academia. And beyond that, we also have 11 co-innovation labs across the world and 13 innovation centers associated with that. And in addition to this, we have a strategic alliance and co-development with the strategic partners from the cloud providers and companies like Apple and Samsung and others. So there is a lot of innovation that can be accelerated by those four vectors. And one of them, as I said, is the internal ideation and incubation, which is part of the emerging technology and incubation team, to which I'm the chief architect. So there is three motions that we have on emerging technology and incubation, as we kindly call internally as ET&I. So the fourth thing is rethink incubation. So how can we land ventures in either adjacent or new markets for Cisco that can drive a 10x impact to our customers? So it's not something that's going to go for a 10 times $1 billion kind of approach, but more of, if you get there, awesome. But it's more about how we can make our customers and impact to them better. And we're looking at ideas and the whole ideation that we bring inside, and then we evaluate. And I have a slide later that shows how that process works. And then we can get this either for augmentation of the markets that we already play in, or totally new markets or ideations that can generate new markets by itself. And the whole motion is how we can ideate very quickly, validate if there is merits on that idea, do the proof of value, proof of concept, and if there is a thumbs up, then you go for incubation and you either execute fast, or if anything, you fail fast and move down resources to the next idea. And there's those internal startup that has not only the fast ideation and incubation of technology, but also the capability to leverage the Cisco infrastructure and the Cisco sales force and the Cisco mainly in ecosystem of partners and install base, so you can leverage our business and some of that technology gets adopted and gets embedded on the product teams that Cisco already has, so it can accelerate that innovation altogether. The second aspect that I mentioned before is the innovation and technology innovation leadership by having partnerships with universities and academia and research organisms, and also a full team that we have on our group that goes and works with standards and industry standards and regular standards that has to do with our IETF, IEEE, and stuff that we've been doing for many years, but beyond that, including an open source for the contributions, all of that has to do with that group. And then there are co-innovation with partners, as I mentioned before, and with customers, and depending on the technology, even with an ecosystem and group of companies. So on the partners and customers, we are bringing a concept of a design partner with us. So some of those ideas that will go in the process for ideation, validation, and eventually incubation, we do invite either customers or partners, or eventually both, as design partners, so we can get their advice. They help to calibrate and guide as the ideation and the incubation for the fulfillment of the idea goes through. And last but not least, one of the missions of the emerging technology and incubation team is actually relates to the talent. The people aspect is very important to us. It's not only to celebrate and learn from the launches and all the landings that we do, but also for to be able, as I mentioned before, to fail fast and move ahead, to be able to catalyze and attract new talents, to be able to retain the new talents, give opportunities for people to work on new technologies and new markets that go in there. We just had inside Cisco a place that's called the Bold Bets. It's a tool that anybody on the company, for any organization, can actually go and submit an idea, and that idea will get evaluated by the committee. And if there is merits, we're going to build a POV. And from there, we eventually going to incubate, and that may be the next product or the functionality on the product or the next market that we go after. So it's open, so it fosters the entrepreneurship inside Cisco by empowering anybody to become as part of this talent pool that we can actually get ideas from. And there are aspects on how we can then be agile on flashing teams, come together for that venture, and by the time that a venture has succeeded and you just move this to the business, for instance, then that team is reused for another venture. And if one of the ideas didn't come through or we need to fail fast, that team gets reallocated and so on and so forth. And by that, we have a cloud-first engineering model, and we are focusing on the cloud-native development and everything that has to do with the latest and greatest technologies out there. So that is a high level on how we are organizing as a team for foster incubation from Cisco. And we are looking at the moonshots and long shots and the stargates and 6 degrees methodologies that relate to innovations, as many of you may have heard about. And we have today 3 ventures that are part of the ET&I organization that are in progress, that has been done their proof of value and is on incubation phases, which is specific on application networking and application security, which I'll touch upon in a more specific details later, and the same with continuous multi-factor authentication. Those are between the first and the second degree, where is a business we are currently in, but we want to make it even better. And at the same time, they have the ability to disrupt the existing space by creating new markets or leveraging or building new next generation architectures and associated business models. So those in black are the 3 that we are working on now. And we have other 2 that we are on that process to get towards the venture, which is the concept of the future collaborators and the home enterprise. As we get after this pandemic, there is a lot of needs for enterprise concepts as it relates to connectivity, security, and approach to go back to home and making that consistent across. So that's an idea that we are exploring. But the three rather that are in black is the one that we are already active working on ideas that already passed through the process and are on the venture stage. And if you look, there are others that are more how we can consider some new markets and some associations, like you're inspecting contactless supply chain and looking at that and work with some design partners in the industry to evaluate this and see how we can go fast for that eventually. And there is also the approach of seamless healthcare and seamless supply chain from the same lens. So this just gives you an example on how we're looking at the problem statement from, as I have on the title of that slide, looking at the moonshots and stargates and so on and so forth. And those are the ones that we have there, up to a point that, as I mentioned before, because we have a boat bat, that portal that is open for anybody to just submit ideas, and they all get evaluated and they all get considered to either pursue or being back to the ideation person to say, hey, it's better if you consider this differently, or this is already a motion that is already addressed on the market, you may not be aware of it, or hey, that might be a functionality and a product that already exists, and you be better off to talk with the product teams that Cisco has in that regards. So on any case, that can foster a situation where you have a new idea that may come in 6 degrees. You have a totally new market and there is no association of any kind, and you're gonna do the same process evaluation, and if that pass the POV and becomes worth to get a venture, you're gonna get there. So that's pretty much where you head into. And the ETNI ideation and venture process in a nutshell is pretty much what is on that slide. I apologize for being kind of a busy slide, but the idea is we have, as I mentioned before, the ideate process. All our ideas are submitted for a single portal. So we have that exploration of ideas. So we listen to customer pain points, to VC communities, to entrepreneurs, to our own employees. We have entrepreneurs in residence to us. So we have this whole ideation process. And by the time of that ideation process, some of them will not make sense as an idea for the reasons that I mentioned before. But for the ones that do, then we go after to create a proof of concept and build a proof of value to make it ready to potentially incubate phase, when we evaluate not only the technical viability, but also the go-to-market viability. Is that something that is viable as an idea for us to incubate? And on that, we have the testing and the building, interacting based on what the MVP would look like, and then have the customer feedback. And as we incubate this, we are headed towards an MVP, the most viable product, the minimum viable product rather, and that would be our outcome from this group. And then we have as an MVP, as a product ready for market, or we get to a point throughout the development process to realize, hey, there is actually not a product market fit as we thought it would be. And then we rather exit and fail fast so we can start with another idea for incubate and be part of the process. And if we get and evolve this in such a way that you have a product ready for market, then you have the process to scale that out. It's pretty much where you have the Cisco Venture Board approves that, and there is go to market and the customer readiness. So that's where we map to the big Cisco machinery for the go to market strategy and all that comes with it. So it's a very straightforward process, if you will, not too much complication on it. It's just you ideate, we maximize the pool of ideas that we can get by being open, and by that we just go to validate on the go-to-market and technical viability, and from there we incubate up to a point that we either recognize that as early as possible in that process there is not a real product market fit and we exit, or then our goal is to get to the product ready for market and scale. So the 4 areas that we are focusing today for incubation from ET&I, which I just represent on that slide as 4 quadrants, are pretty much the areas that relates to security, cloud, which is, well, I know that both are broad terms and I'm going to go a little bit more specific on them, but we want to shoot to the top of the mountain because then ideas will flourish out of those scopes. So we're not trying to be constrained on being, let's say, network security only because Cisco has a big network uh, presence, if you will. But to talk about security, and for instance, one example that we are going after is zero trust with the partnership that we have in our own security group inside Cisco. And cloud is there is app infrastructure. So we are going after cloud native, and as we relate for the DevOps motions to the infrastructure associated with this, how we can make this 10 times better for the customer, as I said on the first slide. So there is the aspect of data itself. So either being data, big data, distributed data, AI, and machine learning that relates with that data. So this whole data aspect, and one of the ideas that we are thinking about is intelligent process automation that relates with that data and how consumption, utilization, distribution of that is part of an area that we are thinking for focusing. And the last one is the future of collaboration. And that is something that we already had in mind as one of the focus areas. And now after the pandemic hits, it becomes even more paramount. A lot of people ask questions, and I look forward to have a conversation with Mitch later that will touch upon some of those experience from a people perspective, the future of work, and associate with that. So those four areas are interesting in quadrants of focus on AT and I today, and that's where we are pretty much anchoring our incubation. It doesn't mean that we may have an awesome idea that comes and evaluate that is a different area that brings a new market. We're going to go after that. So the guiding principles is around this because it relates more to what our customers have saying to us that is more important to make their experience and make it better for them overall. So with that said, we have pretty much, as I mentioned before, 3 early stage ventures, and I have that on a couple of slides before this one. So let me go quickly one by one. So the first one that we have is application networking. And the application networking here pretty much portrays the need of having a communication between application constructs that not necessarily will be mapped to infrastructure for itself. Let me give an example. You may want to have a networking, and that's what we're building towards, that is talking between a data that resides on a database on a particular vendor on premises, talking of being accessible for a SaaS platform that runs 100% to the cloud, which is being consumed or governed by a microservices application running on a hybrid environment. So if you think about this, it's an application level conversation that goes at the business process from the application level. And what we are looking at this from the lens of cloud native, 100% on that particular venture, is something to build a multi-platform, multi-cluster services to services discovery. So I'm talking about the cloud native here. I'm talking about Kubernetes clusters in particular. And if you have a multi-cluster environment that is running services on top of it, which for instance, services mesh. So I may have a situation that I have multiple Kubernetes clusters that are running implementations of a services mesh in either sidecar or other models. And by doing that, we may need to communicate in between them for the services that they will consume for the application networking experience to be provided and be better than what it is today. So for instance, if you have an example of app mesh on AWS and open source Istio running for on premises, and they need to talk in between themselves to deliver the application that runs and being consumed on these two environments. We are building the networking that makes this services to services discovery and communication possible, but also how we make this secure regardless of location and environment that we have. So part of that application networking venture and construct that we are building towards is already published on open source, so we contribute that. It is the networking services mesh.io. So I recommend you to check out if you have time. It already provides you an open source code and the guidance that we go into how we make this for a layer 3 on the OSI, if you will, the network services mesh from layer 3 to layer 3 on making that possible. And we are going after all the layers up to the layer 7 for that app networking venture. So the second approach, and the second venture, I should have said, is the application and workload security. So that's pretty much where the goal is to have a security from the lens of the app, which is pretty much on the cloud native again perspective, is consumed by an API, is always an API away, is always related to how we can have this DevOps environment where code is put in a repository and it needs to be consumed, it needs to be checked, and I need to guarantee if the API that I'm consuming for that piece of code that I download for an open source, or rather, if I go even to a services that is consumed for a cloud provider or a SaaS provider, if the API that I'm receiving is actually secure, if I score that API versus other vulnerability, how I bring threat response together with that. So the idea is to make these combinations of motions that I just mentioned to you as it relates to cloud native application security, just beyond the motion of shift left, and actually have a full way of provide application workload security for cloud native on a DevOps, DevSecOps, DevNetSecOps environment, or whatever the acronym of the week is, and going after providing app security inside the developers' pipelines of the customers and their production environment, as those two start to get more and more important when customers rely more on cloud native applications for their business and move to digital through cloud native. So that is the second venture. We are well ahead on those two, and you're talking about them. We are not only developing them, we actually, as part of the initial slide, the slide number one that I had, we even acquired two companies that will help us with that by bringing talent that has expertise on cloud native with both Portchief and Banzai Cloud. And those are helping us on how we shape those ventures as it relates to this particular piece of technology. And the last one that I mentioned before that was on that slide has to do with continuous multi-factor authentication. And continuous multi-factor authentication aims to address an interesting, I would just say a problem, but an interesting situation that happens on the market today. So as customers implement authentication, that is multi-factor authentication like Cisco Duo, a solution that a lot of customers have, and it's very well adopted in the market. So Duo is looking for the before the authentication aspect to be passwordless, and that's part of the technology evolution that our zero trust architecture inside Cisco is bringing. While we are working continuously with that team and empowering or making even better is the concept of continuous MFA. What does that mean? So if I have a multi-factor authentication and I receive a second and a third factor to actually authenticate my access to a web browser or to an application or to a VPN concentrator, whatever that is. So by the time that I authenticated, then after that fact, I'm in. And if I'm in that particular environment, until I have a new authentication, whatever is happening and whatever I'm trying to do that doesn't force or doesn't trigger another authentication. So what we augmenting the concept of MFA with the continuous MFA is looking for that from a behavioral aspect and adding additional factors that can be monitoring all the time. So if, let's say, let me give you an example. So if Carlos, which is me, and authenticate with my phone, and I'm in the United States, and I travel to another country, which in these times is a lot of tougher to do, but that's what I used to do a lot. and I'm in a different place, just let's say the GPS location can be a factor to consider whether by being on that particular location, I will still be able to access the application or the resource that I'm trying to. So this is another aspect for this. And let's say if I am using additional factors for that behavior, by monitoring what I am doing, I may get in a situation to say, hey, if I'm keeping trying different things on the application and my continuous multi-level access control is being evaluated, I may get to a point to say, hey, you can have a scoring of access control. If I'm getting to an ATM and trying to get money out, if at that given time my score is, let's say, over 80%, I can get money out. If I'm under 50% and beyond 30%, let's say, I can have just my statement of what I have in the account. And if I'm under 30%, I don't get anything. And that is different than the typical I'm in and out kind of authentication. So as you can see, there is an evolution that we are augmenting the market that already exists like that Cisco has a solution and bringing innovations that has not only these multi-factors, but this behavioral, this scoring aspect, and all the technology that comes behind this to integrate with multiple systems and make that experience seamless. So that's pretty much what I had to share with you as it relates to the emerging technology and incubation team, and how we on our team are specifically looking at standards, research and academia interactions, and everything that has to do with driving incubation through an ideation process that is open and focusing on the talents to be able to get them through incubate. Make sure that if you fail, if that fails, you need to fail fast so we can start again, the whole startup mentality. But at the same time, as we graduate those for an MVP, they have a place to get to the business and leverage the go-to-market that we evaluate since the beginning. So since we look all this aspect of driving innovation through technology on this conversation, and one of them has to do with talent, let's bring in Mitch. And we look from that perspective, but specifically on the future of work, and get some wisdom and the experience that he brings to the table on this interesting conversation. Let's bring Mitch in. Mitch Lowy is the co-founding executive of Netflix and the former president of Redbox. So welcome, Mitch. Very nice to have you here.
Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Carlos. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Appreciate your availability. More than anything, your opening to discuss a topic that is being top of mind to the majority of the customers of ours and the world actually out there. It has to be with the future of work. So I would like to bounce some ideas with you and get your experience and your guidance and advice on how you see companies creating the future of work and the new environments that work that comes from there, inclusive at home. Any advice and best practice from what you're hearing out there?
Yeah, well, it's this is all happening so fast, and there's so much pressure to figure out how to, in one sense, how to recreate all the great things that happen in a work environment. Running into someone, walking down the hallway, having conference rooms. So we're all very hard at work figuring out how to make it as good as it was. But at the same time, we're finding all these kind of new ways and new improvements on working together. So I think it's a combination of things. The first thing is, we've got some great technology to have all these meetings, with lots of people, share ideas. But one of the things I think we're missing, and one of the recommendations I would have, is you still need to make time for those one-on-one meetings with no real agenda. In other words, don't just get lazy and wait, for a conference call with 20 people on the line, or 5 people or 4 people. But in addition, reach out to the individuals in your company, on your team, with no agenda in mind, and just talk, whether it's through a video call or through a regular telephone line, because that's one thing that I think we could be losing during this period of time. This is, in a way, I think teams and groups are actually working more often together than they were before the quarantine happened. So I'm really excited about kind of this new age, and if we're lucky, we'll all be able to go back to meeting in person. But now we'll have more options. Now we'll know how to both integrate digital meetings along with the real in-person meetings.
So I like it, and I personally relate to that because at Cisco we have been this weekly check-ins that is kind of driven from the CEO down, when you try to have these open conversations. But beyond that, reaching out to the team members to just check them in and say, hey, how are you doing? How are your family? And this kind of things is actually important. To your point, I wish we were on the bar and having this conversation over drinks, and you're doing virtual and you're making the best of that experience. And thanks for that. It's a very good advice. I believe that everybody will benefit from. So there is another aspect that as those companies evolve their perspective, and you just mentioned one to be added, which is the personal connection, just not for the sake of a business meetings. As they evolve their perspective and their own policies, how do you see the digital security being part of this on this COVID era, if you will? How are they balancing the worker privacy and, to some point, contact tracing for business that are having people back to their offices or manufacturing plants and whatever they are?
Yeah. huge challenge. Not being in the office, being at home often, and of course not traveling, opens up all kinds of security issues where we all need to be even more vigilant than we had in the past, responding to, emails that we don't know where they came from, answering questions that we're not 100% sure, where that questioner is coming from. So on the security side, I think we need to remind everybody in our organizations to be even more vigilant. Just because you're relaxed at home doesn't mean you don't need to be thinking about security. So I think that's an important thing. I think also a lot of these kind of new ways to get together, or the ease of getting together with people from all over the world in one meeting, that's a trend that's been going on for a while, and we're all getting kind of better at those skills. If I think back to March, how awkward I was and how many were in all these virtual meetings, having your dog run across the room, your kids start crying. I think we're not only all getting better at it, but we're all starting to realize, we're kind of, in someone's life. We're getting to see where they live. We're seeing their home office, and there's a certain privacy concerns. People, if you're uncomfortable with people, seeing exactly where you work from, you need to be thinking about that. But you also need to figure out how to use all that extra time we have where we're not commuting, for positive things, whether they're for your family or for work, so that we can all kind of be better participants in all aspects of our life.
You touch upon the personal life and the privacy of the worker as they're working from home. One of the aspects that we're seeing a lot of customers, and Cisco has been working with them, and we have solutions on that space that relates with the tracing of contacts inside the office. So just to make sure that we somehow advise social distancing, leveraging technology to see whether people are too close and to avoid crowds and and this is an area that it is technically possible, but it's interesting. Some companies do look at this as a benefit. Some others have the worker privacy. So I agree with you. That is a big challenge going on today. And as we see those challenges evolving to your people perspective that you brought before, how do you see from your experience and the interaction with company and people leaders out there? How do you see the talent management has been evolving as a result of what's going on this kind of past year, if you will, not a full year, but it looks like has been much longer than that. So, what do you
Yeah.
learn from those leaders, especially when they need to face the challenge of themselves working remotely and people in their teams that may not want to or they need to go daily in office for attendance matters? How do you see that talent managing evolving?
Yeah. The many aspects of working with your team and working within your organization seem to be fine. But when it comes to hiring new employees or having to let someone go or going through disciplinary action, that I think is a little bit difficult. We're all used to asking tough questions for prospective new employees. We and when you're not face to face, you don't get the full picture. So I think we're still learning a lot on a couple of aspects of our work: the hiring, the firing, the discipline. Those are a little bit less efficient when you're remote, and they take more time and more consideration. So I think otherwise, all the other, establishing your goals, keeping people, motivated to hit their goals, whether it's sales or customers or customer satisfaction. Those I think are working fine, but there's a couple areas where we have some challenges.
Yeah, I have a follow-up point that you just mentioned. One thing that triggered my attention has to do with motivation. So, what's in your view the best way that you can motivate employees during these challenging times? What have you seen as good practice for other companies as you deal with them and have these relationships?
Mhm. Well, as long as you have the basic foundation of a good working relationship, meaning there's very clear goals and objectives for each of your team members, and the environment is such that your team members are able to be the ones to figure out how to accomplish something. You as a leader aren't telling them how to do it. I think we all know that if you tell your team members how to accomplish their job, you're going to get very little passion and very little motivation from them. They have to feel like they're the ones figuring out the problem. They're the ones who are solving solving the challenges. And so us as leaders, I think we have to make sure we've got our foundation and our basics of leadership right, where we're giving them the environment to succeed. What resources do you need? Do you understand the mission? Do you understand how you're going to be measured? And then giving them the latitude. But I think it goes to something that we've talked about before, and that is keep in regular touch, with your employees. Get on the phone, call them, talk about how things are going for them. You can't just assume that things are going well if you haven't had that one-on-one conversation outside of an agendaed work meeting. I think that's motivation all comes from your team member feeling that their leader and their company cares about them and their future, that there is opportunities to grow and advance, and that I have a clear understanding of what I need to do to be successful. Those are the ingredients for motivating your team to kind of overperform, whether it's getting their job done or innovating. Those are the things that are the foundations.
I really like, Mitch, the wisdom that you're sharing on this top three kind of the motions to keep teams motivated, but not only the teams from the lens of the manager towards the teams, but themselves amongst the groups and amongst groups, which implies some things that you said that I found very interesting. Connectivity or conversations and the actually personal connectivity becomes even more foundational these days. And
Yeah.
based on that premises, which I believe in, you just shared that you also are very strong on that. What tips do you have for retaining this corporate culture that you just mentioned and to connect with people and teams while still empowering the business that the corporations are in charge of? How do you see that
Mhm.
balancing of retaining the culture and connecting that people you just mentioned while empowering the business?
Mhm. Well, I think it starts by doing something we often take for granted, and that is clearly spelling out your principles for work. Like, what are the 5 or 6 things that are the most important things with someone who's working with you? It might be something like one of mine, which is if you can't deliver on time, please tell me in advance. Don't surprise me at the last minute. One, that's not really well worded, but the idea is I want people to work with me who are responsible. And yes, I understand sometimes the timing doesn't allow them to get something done at the agreed upon time. But the last thing I want to have happen is to be surprised at the last minute they're not going to deliver. So, one of the principles that I make clear to my team members is that one. And each, and then there's the standard ones, ethics and so on, but treating people equally. But I think one of the things you can do in these organizations is have everybody in the team write out the 5 or 6 things that are most important to them for a good work environment, and then share them with each other and come to a consensus on what are the most important. If every team member and you has an understanding of what kind of makes you tick, what is valuable to you, then you take away the guesswork. You take away a lot of the disappointments. Or if the disappointments happen, they're more serious than kind of accidentally misunderstanding you. So I think that's kind of the key, a key start to this whole thing. I think second is this whole idea of giving the vision of where you want to go. And there's a quote by Saint-Exupéry, who wrote The Little Prince, I think more than 100 years ago. He said, if you want to teach your team to build a ship, get them to yearn for the open sea. And essentially what that is saying is that you don't want to say, measure out 6 pieces of wood 2 meters long. No, you want to say, we want to go explore all across the raging sea. What do you think we should build, and how should we build it? In other words, it's this idea of getting your team to be the ones to figure out how to reach the vision or the goals of the team. And I think by doing that, people enjoy coming to work. People are passionate about what they're accomplishing. They're proud of what they're doing. They understand how they're being measured. And I think it creates a almost magical results that often surprise other teams and competitors.
Yeah, I love, Mitch, what you just shared. It's kind of two guiding principles that honestly any corporation should adopt, and they go beyond corporation. and it's kind of being candid and clear and empower everybody to be able to participate and shoot to the top of the mountain. Don't look what's
Yeah,
ahead of you. Just had a vision to go there. Yeah, love it.
yeah,
So, Mitch, we are getting to the end of our conversation. Unfortunately, I'm really enjoying it. So I want to get this a little personal, if you don't mind. So I have a question. How
mhm.
has COVID changed your daily routine and productivity? I can share mine as well if you want. And based on that, what advice do you think you have for us to remain engaged as a community as you talk with the Cisco Connect audience here?
Yeah. Wow. It's changed my life so much, and I'm sure it's changed every one of our lives. What's really changed for me is, not only am I not commuting, but I'm not traveling anywhere near what I used to. And that is giving me a whole lot more time with my family and a lot more time on my own. And so, and that's tough. It's really tough
Yeah.
to, you know, like be disconnected from the people you work with. I miss it. I feel lonely, often. Sometimes I don't know what to do with myself. And over time, I think each of us has to figure out how to use all that extra time. And for me, it's been, some of the things on my bucket list. I'm taking Spanish classes. I'm learning to play the piano.
Oh,
So trying to get healthier. But so many of us, and I was in this too in the first couple months. I was lethargic. I was depressed. I felt sorry for myself. And, eventually I realized, God, that could end up in a really bad place and just get worse and worse. So I think for all of us, we have to kind of shake ourselves out of this whole thing and make the best of it. And the best of it, part of it is more time with your family. Now, if you're on your own, I can imagine it can be incredibly lonely. And in fact, streaming services, I think Netflix added 4 million more subscribers in the second quarter than it had expected. And it's
yeah.
all due to people binge watching, but binge watching all day and all night, episodes of different series on Netflix. So I think each of us has to figure out our own kind of solution to this thing, and hopefully this 6 more months, 5 more months, hopefully now that we've kind of gotten an understanding of what needs to be done, maybe it'll go faster or slower. I don't know.
So, Mitch, thanks a lot for being so open about your experiences. I kind of felt the same in the beginning, and you, as a co-founding executive of Netflix, you know better those numbers and how people react from that regards, and you're spot on that. And part of the time on the productivity and daily routine, you need to be careful. You touch on a very good point as if you don't watch for yourself, you get lazy, even though you have more time to eventually exercise, and you're going to work more hours just because it's there in front of you at home. So, this self
Right.
discipline and self consciousness is very important for to remain engaged for the greater good. So, Mitch,
Yeah.
I really, really enjoyed the conversation. As I said, I wish it was in person on in a restaurant and a place, and I look forward to have this by the time we all can back to our travel scheduling. But on behalf of Cisco and the Cisco Connect, I really want to thank you for your wisdom and for sharing with us and for your time. Thank you really, really very much.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you, Carlos. Thank you, Cisco, and for thinking about this and making this important. And I really, really appreciate the time.
Hey, the conversation with Mitch was really, really interesting. I like it a lot. I really enjoy it. It was awesome for me. I learned a lot from his experience and some of the interesting perspectives he brought to the conversation. Hope the same was for you all. And with that, we just come to a closer and showing you how we can drive innovation through technology on all the aspects that we have on incubation and ideation on the ET&I team, but always keeping an eye on the talent piece and on how we can be better amongst ourselves as a team. And with that, I would like to thank you all for watching. Have you all a blessed day.